The coffee had gone cold in her hand. Olivia Bennet sat perfectly still on the bottom step of her staircase, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to a conversation that was never meant for her. Her husband, David, had called to say goodnight while on his business trip. A mumbled, "Love you, talk tomorrow," a muffled rustle, and then he hadn't hung up. For 7 minutes now, Olivia had been a ghost in his hotel room, listening as he laughed with his colleague, Mark. The laughter had just faded, replaced by the clink of a bottle. Honestly, man, David's voice was loose, tired. Sometimes I think about just driving west and not stopping. This whole white picket fence minivan life. It feels like a costume I put on every morning. Olivia's breath crystallized in her lungs. The staircase beneath her felt like it was dissolving. "Olivia's perfect," he continued, and the word perfect sounded like a curse. The perfect wife, perfect mom to Lily, but it's all so heavy. The schedules, the mortgage, the silent dinners. I feel like I'm disappearing. In the background, Mark murmured something Olivia couldn't catch. David sighed, a long, weary sound that traveled 800 miles through the line and wrapped around her heart like a vice. I don't know if I love her anymore. I just know I don't love this. The phone finally went dead. In the echoing silence of her suburban Chicago home, Olivia Bennet began to unravel. The silence after the call was a physical presence. It filled the two-story colonial, pressing against the carefully chosen throw pillows and the gallery wall of family photos. Olivia remained on the step, the patterned runner biting into her bare legs. She could see into the living room where Lily's stuffed animals were lined up on the sofa, waiting for tomorrow's games. She could see the kitchen, clean and gleaming, David's favorite mug upside down on the drying rack. A perfect stage set. A prison, he'd called it. For 7 years, this had been their dream. David, the ambitious architect. Olivia, who'd stepped back from her own graphic design career to manage the dream. They were a team, weren't they? The conversations that had grown shorter, the tired kisses that were more habit than heat, the way they'd become mom and dad more than Olivia and David. She had framed it all as the natural weathering of a shared, busy life. Not as decay. Not as a costume. She moved through the next morning on autopilot. Packed Lily's lunchbox with apple slices and a cheese sandwich cut into stars. Helped her 5-year-old into her rain boots. "Is Daddy coming home today?" Lily asked, her small voice bright with hope. "Tomorrow, sweet pea," Olivia heard herself say, her own voice disturbingly calm, a smooth lake over a deep, cold fracture. She watched the school bus swallow her daughter, then turned back to the empty house. Her first instinct was to rage, to call him and scream, to shatter the perfect silence he resented. But a colder, more strategic part of her, a part she didn't recognize, took over. He thought this was his secret, his private turmoil. He had no idea she was now a silent participant. Knowledge was power, but it was a poisoned, aching power. She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't search for divorce lawyers. Instead, she searched for something else entirely. Signs your marriage has become transactional. Emotional loneliness in long-term relationships. When partners become roommates. She was no longer just a wounded wife. She was a researcher studying the collapse of her own world. The question was, did she want to simply document the disaster, or did she want to try to stop it? And if she tried, was she fighting for David, or for the life she'd built, a life he now claimed was suffocating him? David returned on Friday, bringing the scent of airport and unfamiliar coffee. He hugged Lily until she squealed, presented Olivia with a duty-free perfume she never wore, and asked about her week. His performance was flawless. Olivia watched him, this man she had loved, and saw the subtle tension around his eyes, the too quick smile. She saw the actor behind the costume. How was the Thompson project? She asked over dinner. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes, his favorite comfort meal. Brutal. Client revisions every day, he said, cutting his food with precise strokes. But it's fine. How was your week? Quiet, she said. I've been thinking. Maybe I should take that freelance website redesign job. The one from Anderson Studios. David looked up, surprised. I thought you said you were too busy with the PTI fundraiser and Lily's ballet. I am. She took a sip of water. But I miss it. The work. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something concern. Annoyance? In his gaze. If you think you can handle the stress, we don't need the money, you know? Your plate's already full. Your plate. Our life. The costume. His words from the call echoed. He was gently, kindly, keeping her in her role. The frustration that rose in her was hot and sharp. That night, lying beside his sleeping form, Olivia made a decision. If he saw her only as the manager of their domestic life, she would have to remind him of who she was before. Not through confrontation, but through quiet, unsettling change. She accepted the Anderson job. She enrolled in the Thursday night ceramics class she'd always talked about. She bought a bold crimson coat, a color the old Olivia would have called too much. She stopped asking him 20 questions about his day. Instead, she'd mention an article she'd read or a concept from her class. David watched this subtle transformation with growing confusion. The equilibrium of their quiet discontent was shifting. One evening, as she was sketching at the kitchen table, he paused. You seem... Do I? She said, not looking up. I feel like myself. It was the first crack in his performance. He didn't know what was happening, only that the script had changed, and he no longer knew his lines. The conflict was no longer a silent one in his head. It was now alive. Breathing in the space between them at the dinner table, the struggle was a cold war fought in glances and unspoken words. David, unnerved by Olivia's new independence, vacillated between withdrawal and overcompensation. He started doing the dishes without being asked. He suggested a family movie night. Each kind act felt to Olivia like a desperate placation, a guilty man trying to buy back a piece he didn't understand he'd shattered. It felt hollow. The real battle was within Olivia. Every night, the memory of his voice, I don't know if I love her anymore, played on a loop. It took everything in her not to weaponize it, to not lay the evidence on the table and demand an explanation. But she knew that would only give him an out, a dramatic fight, the concrete reason he'd lamented not having. It would allow him to play the villain or the victim, but it wouldn't save anything. In her ceramics class, her hands covered in cool, gray clay, she found a fragile piece. She was creating something from formless mud, something that could be beautiful or could collapse at any moment. It felt like a metaphor she was too tired to fully dissect. One Thursday, she came home later than usual, her hair smelling of glaze and studio air. David was waiting up, an untouched beer on the coffee table. You're late, he said, not accusatory, but lost. The piece I was working on... I lost track of time, she said, slipping off her coat, the crimson one. What is it? He asked, his voice quiet. What's happening, Olivia? She looked at him, this stranger in her living room. This was the moment. He was asking for the truth, but giving him the truth of her knowledge would end the fight before it truly began. She needed him to find his own truth first. I'm just trying to remember who I am, she said finally. Outside of this house. Outside of us. He looked stricken. Are you unhappy? The question was so profoundly ironic, it almost broke her. She gave the only honest answer she could. I'm figuring that out. She left him sitting in the dim light, the struggle stretching between them, taut and silent. The turning point arrived not with a shout, but with a whimper. Lily woke from a nightmare, her cries slicing through the tense midnight silence of the house. Olivia, already awake and staring at the ceiling, was first to her room. She gathered their trembling daughter into her arms, murmuring soothing nonsense. David appeared in the doorway, his silhouette hesitant. "Daddy's here too, Mug," Olivia said softly, and he crossed the room, sitting on the edge of the bed. In the faint glow of the nightlight, they formed a huddle around Lily's small form. Olivia rocked her, while David stroked her hair, his large hand gentle. It was an old, familiar dance, a script written in the earliest days of parenthood. Lily's breathing slowly evened out, her fist clutching Olivia's sleeve. "Remember when she had colic?" David whispered, his voice rough with sleep and something else. "We'd take shifts walking her around the living room for hours. You used to sing her the terrible song about the waffle-stealing raccoon," Olivia murmured, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "It made her stop crying," he defended quietly. "It made me cry. It was so bad." A low, quiet chuckle escaped him. It was a sound she hadn't heard in months, unguarded, real. For a moment, the unnamed coldness between them retreated, warmed by the shared memory, by the primal, collaborative act of comforting their child. When Lily finally drifted off, they retreated to the hallway. The intimacy of the moment lingered, a fragile bridge over the chasm. David leaned against the wall, running a hand over his face. "Olivia," he began, then stopped. The silence stretched, but it was different now. Charged, but not with hostility. With potential. "I'm lost," he finally said, the words seeming torn from him. He wasn't looking at her, but at the floor. "I feel like I'm on a train that's been moving for years, and I just realized I don't know where it's going. Or if I even want to be on it." This was it. Not the confession of the phone call, but a crack in the armor. He was offering a piece of truth. Olivia's heart hammered. She could seize this, mention the call, force the issue. Instead, she leaned against the opposite wall, mirroring his posture. "What would you rather be doing?" she asked, simply. He looked up, surprised. He'd expected deflection, an argument, tears. Not a question. "I don't know. Something that feels real. Not just ticking boxes." "The boxes we tick built this," she said, gesturing to the house, to Lily's door. "But I get it. It can start to feel like a cage if you forget why you're in it." He stared at her, truly seeing her. The tiredness, the resolve, the woman in the crimson coat who took pottery classes. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, a weary affection in his tone. "When I realized my husband was thinking of driving west," she said softly. The color drained from his face. The hallway seemed to tilt. All the unspoken words, her strange behavior, the shifting ground, it crystallized in that instant. He understood. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The horror in his eyes wasn't at being caught. It was at the realization of the pain he'd inflicted, the lonely vigil she'd been keeping. The turning point wasn't the nightmare, or even his admission. It was the quiet detonation of her 6-word sentence, revealing that she had known. She had known, and she had stayed, and she had fought for them anyway. In the raw aftermath of her revelation, David was shattered. He stammered apologies that Olivia gently halted. "Apologies are just words right now, David," she said, her voice impossibly calm. "They don't rebuild." She suggested a counselor. He agreed immediately, desperately. But before that first appointment, Olivia performed an act of quiet courage that would define their path forward. She asked him to take a day off work. On a Wednesday, with Lily at school, she led him not to a therapist's office, but to the lakefront. The Chicago wind was brisk, whipping off the steel-gray water. They walked in silence for a long time, the gulls crying overhead. "I'm not going to punish you," she said finally. stopping to look at the horizon. "And I'm not going to beg you to stay. That has to be your choice. But if you're choosing, you need to choose between a real me and a real us, or a life without us. Not between a fantasy of freedom and a cartoon of domestic prison." She handed him a small wrapped package. Puzzled, he opened it. Inside was a simple blank journal and a pen. "You said you feel like you're disappearing," she said. "So find yourself. Write about the man who wants to drive west. What does he look like? What does he do all day? What does he miss about the man on the train?" Her voice caught just slightly. "And when you figure that out, I need you to tell me if that man, if he has any love left for the woman who heard it all and still brought him to the lake to say goodbye." It was an extraordinary gift. It was the gift of honesty, demanded and given space. It was the gift of releasing control. She was not tying him down with guilt or obligation. She was setting him free to make an authentic decision. The courage it took to offer that, to risk him choosing to leave, left David breathless. He saw not the perfect wife he resented, but a woman of immense strength and love, who was willing to endure the unbearable uncertainty of his choice for a chance at a real future. He took the journal, his fingers closing over it as if it were a lifeline. The first act of rebuilding wasn't a joint session. It was this solitary, terrifying assignment. And it was her act of courage that made it possible. David wrote. He wrote in the journal at coffee shops before work, in his car during lunch breaks, on the bench at Lily's soccer practice. He wrote about the crushing pressure of being the provider, the fear of mediocrity, the envy of colleagues with less complicated lives. He wrote about missing the early, adventurous days with Olivia, before mortgage and pediatrician appointments. He wrote about the suffocating silence he himself had created. And as he wrote, a slow, agonizing realization dawned. The man who wanted to drive west was lonely, yes. But he was lonely because he had built a wall between himself and the people who loved him. He had mistaken the shared, hard-won comfort of a built life for boredom. He had framed Olivia's competence as a form of control, rather than seeing it as the backbone that allowed their family to thrive. He had wanted her to be the spark to reignite his feeling, without realizing he had drowned his own spark in self-pity and silent resentment. The most profound entry came one rainy Tuesday. He wrote, I said I felt like I was wearing a costume, but I'm the one who stopped bringing the real man home. I handed her the script for Content Husband, and then got mad when she tried to act her part. She wasn't the warden. I was the prisoner, and I was also the one who locked the door. He looked across the living room that night. Olivia was folding laundry, her brow furrowed in concentration. The familiar, domestic scene that once sparked his internal rebellion now looked different. This wasn't a cage. This was the hearth. She wasn't his jailer. She was the fellow traveler he'd been ignoring on his lonely train. The realization was a wave of shame so intense it was nausea. But beneath the shame was a clear, clean truth. He loved her. He had never stopped. He had just forgotten how to see her, and in doing so, had forgotten himself. The freedom he craved wasn't on a highway heading west. It was in the courage to be truly, messily present right here. David didn't declare his realization with grand gestures. Redemption, he was beginning to understand, was a language of small, consistent truths. He started showing up, not just in body, but in attention. He put his phone away during dinner and asked Lily about her friends' names, about the plot of the cartoon she loved. He listened to the answers. One evening, he found Olivia in her new studio, a corner of the garage with her pottery wheel and shelves of slowly drying creations. She was centering a lump of clay, her arms streaked with gray, her face a mask of focused calm. He watched for a long moment from the doorway. It's harder than it looks, he finally said, softly so as not to startle her. She didn't look up, her hands steady on the spinning mound. The centering is everything. If it's not centered here, the whole thing will be weak. It'll collapse when you try to build it up. The metaphor hung in the air, thick with meaning. David stepped closer. "Can I watch?" She nodded. He began to bring her coffee while she worked. He didn't offer empty praise, but asked genuine questions about the process. He was, for the first time in years, curious about her inner world. Their first session with the counselor, Dr. Evans, was fraught. David confessed to the phone call, to his emotional flight, his voice thick with remorse. Olivia spoke of the profound isolation of hearing his betrayal, and the strategic, lonely courage it took to not retaliate. Dr. Evans called it relational trauma, but also pointed to the remarkable fact that they were both still in the room, fighting to understand it. Forgiveness was not a single event. It was Olivia choosing not to bring up the phone call during a disagreement about finances. It was David, when feeling the old urge to withdraw, forcing himself to say, "I need a minute, but I'm not shutting you out. I'll be back." It was in the weary, honest conversations after Lily was asleep, where they untangled years of miscommunications, not as adversaries, but as archaeologists carefully brushing dust from a shared valued artifact. The most significant moment came on a Sunday afternoon. They were cleaning out the garage together, a chore they both hated. David found a dusty box marked Old Projects. Inside were sketches, whimsical, ambitious architectural designs he'd done in college and his early career, a treehouse community, a library shaped like an open book, a sustainable micro-home, dreams he'd filed away as impractical. Olivia pulled one out, a sketch of a glass-walled house on a cliff overlooking water. "You were so brilliant," she said, her voice wistful, so full of fire. "I got practical," he said, the old defensiveness rising. "No," she corrected gently, turning to him. "You got scared. There's a difference. The practical thing built us a good life. But maybe the fire doesn't have to go out. Maybe it just needs a different kind of fuel." In that moment, he felt seen in a way he hadn't in a decade. Not as a provider, but as a dreamer. And she wasn't criticizing the path they'd taken. She was offering to help him reconnect with the passion that started it. He reached for her hand, his fingers clay-stained from helping her wedge clay earlier. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, the words raw. "Maybe not," she said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "But you have me. If you still want me." The redemption was in his tears then, silent and cleansing. The forgiveness was in her hand, holding his tight. 8 months later, the first frost glittered on the backyard grass. Olivia stood at the kitchen window, watching the scene outside. David, wearing a ridiculous pom-pom hat Lily had made him, was on his hands and knees on the lawn. He was helping Lily and 3 of her friends construct a frost castle, using sticks, fallen leaves, and their imaginations. His laughter, clear and unburdened, floated on the cold air. The house was different now, not in its structure, but in its atmosphere. Olivia's pottery sat on shelves mixed with David's old framed architectural sketches. The calendar had her client meetings and his newly instated Design Think days blocked in different colors. The silence was no longer heavy, but often companionable, the sound of 2 people content in their own thoughts, yet firmly together. David's journey west had turned inward, and he'd found a new continent within himself. He'd started a small, pro bono initiative at his firm, designing community spaces for underserved neighborhoods. It was a tiny flame, but it was his flame. Olivia's freelance work had blossomed, her confidence a tangible force. They had learned to partner not just in logistics, but in dreaming. Lily burst through the back door, cheeks rosy, followed by a cold breeze and David. "Mommy, come see. Daddy helped us make a throne." "In a minute, adventurer," Olivia laughed, handing her a cup of hot chocolate. David leaned against the counter, his eyes on Olivia. There was a quiet understanding between them, a history that contained a fracture and the careful, chosen work of repair. The love they had now was different. It was not the untested, feverish love of their 20s. It was a love that knew the cost of inattention, the poison of silent resentment, and the immense, gritty power of choosing each other again after seeing the very worst. That night, after stories and good nights, David pulled a small box from his pocket. It wasn't a ring. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a simple, glazed ceramic pendant Olivia had made in her early classes, a little imperfect. A hairline crack visible in the glaze, but beautiful in its solid, earthy form. "You made this," he said. "It's strong. And it's real. And it's centered." He fastened the clasp around her neck. "That's us now." Olivia touched the pendant, feeling its cool, smooth surface. The crack wasn't a flaw. It was proof it had been through the fire and survived. It was kintsugi, in its own way, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. Moral: the story of Olivia and David teaches us that the greatest threat to love is often not a dramatic betrayal, but the slow, silent drift of two hearts ceasing to share their inner worlds. A marriage, like clay, must be continually centered on honesty and mutual curiosity, or it will spin apart under the pressure of life. Forgiveness is not forgetting a hurt, but choosing to build a new, stronger structure around the truth of it. And sometimes, the most courageous act is not to chase a fantasy of escape, but to turn and face the life you built and decide, with clear eyes and an open heart, to truly live in it. The most profound journeys are not measured in miles driven west, but in the depth of understanding forged right where you stand.